Good afternoon, class, or I guess more importantly, good evening, depending on where you're located. We're going to get into chapter 10, which to me is an interesting chapter in this text, a chapter that, at least when I was in graduate school, not too many, or not a lot of time actually, was allocated to global leadership, to being an effective leader in a global environment. I mean, it just was not um, I guess not at the top of everybody's radar at that point in time. But as technology has increased and um, the ability of companies, especially in the U.S., um, building out, acquiring, global representation around the world, setting up regional offices in other parts of the world. Just think about customer service for your credit card, for health plans, for um, well, just almost customer service in general. Just think of the times that you pick up and call somebody on customer service, and you may be talking to somebody in India, somebody in the Philippines, somebody in the Pacific Rim somewhere, and it's turning into a global business environment that if you're an individual born and bred in the United States, maybe it's something that's going to interest you going forward. And if you take, if you just stop and think about it, most of the business classes in the European, at least in the European business schools, are taught in English. France, Germany, Spain. English is probably the primary language of business, throughout the world. So just be aware that you there are some instances where it could uh, cause some issues as you decide to pursue that route. And we'll get into them in a few minutes. First, I'd like to just quickly jump in and go back and review just a couple of quick tidbits that we had from chapter 9. And in chapter 9, the authors make a comment that diversity is a fact of life. And it is a fact of life. And it has gotten more and more a fact of life if you're trying to function in a leadership role. You've got things like ethnicity, race, gender that you're trying to juggle, and you're trying to manage a team of diverse individuals trying to incorporate their skill sets and their knowledge base into a well oiled, functioning, very efficient team and a operational machine, and it can get really difficult. The author spent a few minutes talking about the glass ceiling, and that's where an individual, a minority for the most part, keeps bumping up against this glass ceiling, can't get any higher. And from a promotion standpoint, if they're trying to climb their corporate ladder. You've also got the glass cliff that they talk about, and that's when somebody is promoted into a role of leadership, and individuals that working with them, or maybe their peer groups, they deem that they were promoted for some reason other than their experience and expertise and ability to exceed, and that's when they end up, as the authors say, sliding or falling off that glass cliff. Also, they touched for a few minutes about reverse discrimination, and that is, I've seen that raise its ugly head more and more. Say, in the last, well, and I keep tying everything back to COVID, but I have seen a significant increase in potential, reverse discrimination issues since COVID hit, and especially since people were sent home, businesses closed down, that kind of thing. And spent a few minutes, the authors talking about incongruity and stereotyping. And I'm sure a lot of us at one point in our careers or another have run into issues with incongruity and stereotyping. And again, it's almost like diversity. It's a fact of life. You've got perceptions, not only within the leadership's class, but peers of the leadership, subordinates, direct supervisors. it's a trying leaders are trying to walk this fine line, trying to succeed, and it has become more and more difficult over the last few years. And then the authors tried to tie everything together and tried to close out the chapter talking about male leaders in an increasingly diverse environment. They talked about a lack of an inclusive mindset, uh, maximizing the benefits of diversity while reducing its potential downside. And while there are significant benefits for diversity or with diversity or an inclusion in your team, there can be some pitfalls and some significant downsides. And I've witnessed both over the years. And it again, as a leader, you are going to be walking a very, very fine line, or as I say, walking that tightrope as you try to incorporate and increase diversity of your teams, and also to manage the downfall and the downside of that diversity issue. And then lastly, they with male leaders, they have issues with paradox of building cultured homogeneity while allowing for diversity. And most leaders that I've been involved with like to have a team that is somewhat similar to them in vision and values and maybe societal background. So it gets really tough trying to meld that in with the potential opportunities that you can incorporate into your team with diversity. So that's kind of wrapped up chapter 9, and then we're going to move on to chapter 10, and we're going to they have a little definition at the start of the chapter, and it's talking about an expatriate, or an expat is what you're referred to a lot of times, and it's an individual who lives typically with his or her family in a country other than his or her origin for at least 6 months at a time. You hear it, and again, you hear it on the news talking about expats. If any of you have been in the military or know somebody in the military, it's not out of the ordinary that if their last tour of duty is in Germany or Italy or maybe even Japan, that that may retire and get out and may want to stay there for a while. Maybe their spouse is from one of those countries, and they decide to stay and give it a try and see what it's like. So, and it's your classic global leader. It's the definition of a classic global leader, at least in the historical sense. But with with the interaction, with international travel, I mean, I don't know, the last time I flew to France, it was from Atlanta to France. It's, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 hours. I can't remember how long it takes. Or, from Atlanta to London. Unfortunately, if you live in Nashville, there's probably not a lot of direct flights. You may have to go Nashville to Charlotte, Nashville to Dulles, Nashville to BWI, maybe even Nashville to one of the New York or Boston airports to get to Europe. But still, it's doable. It's much more doable than it was, say, 20 years ago. So with technology like Zoom and Teams and chat and text and international travel, those individuals are now being called maybe not so much expats, but they're being referred to as global domestic. And it is a situation where that if you are multilingual, you stand a better chance of actually being a very effective leader. If you've got 1 foot in the United States and 1 foot in the regional office that your company has in France, or maybe it's in Madrid, or maybe it's in Berlin, or maybe it's even in Japan or Taiwan, or even somewhere in South America. So you have to and no matter whether you're there living, as I said, 6 months at a time, or you're doing it through technology, it's interactions with individuals from other parts of the world, regardless of your home base. So now, rather than being uprooted with your family and your personal issues and family issues could definitely impact it. There's the added living expenses if you're trying to keep a household going here in the United States and maybe a household going in one of the countries outside the United States, even though you may have some offset from your company. It's a struggle sometimes with living expenses. And when I think of expats, especially those that maybe are maybe only there for short periods of time, I think of athletes, especially basketball players, hockey players. Um, we'll go back to basketball players, maybe not so much football, but basketball especially, can't really make it in the NBA, and they end up going overseas and playing in some of your professional basketball leagues overseas. The women's NBA, you have a lot of those individuals. Once the season's over here in the United States, they will take off, go play in some of the professional women's leagues overseas. And I think that's what that Bethany Griner got hung up with. She was over in Russia playing kind of in the off season, and got hung up trying to come through the airport with, I don't know, she had drugs or something that they supposedly held her up. But you have a lot of individuals again trying to maximize revenues or trying to maximize their personal income, and one way they do it is kind of 1 foot here in the United States and 1 foot outside the United States, in kind of an athletic event. One of the other individuals, at least friends that I have, are in the military, and it doesn't matter whether they're in Spain or Italy or one of the Japanese bases. There are bases now in Syria and Saudi Arabia and scattered throughout the world. And it's not so much, at least the feedback I get from them, it's not so much an issue with the individual that's serving in the military. The issue falls with the spouse or the partner and the kids, because there's, especially overseas, and let's just take South Korea, Japan. It's my understanding that it is really difficult for a spouse or a partner that's over there with, for on a 2 or 3 year duty station, that's over there, and it's difficult for them to work if they can't get work on base. It's extremely difficult for them to get a job. Similar with a lot of, I've known a few people that have gone overseas as an English teacher. There's a fairly high demand for English teachers overseas, healthcare workers, especially nurses and doctors. So there's just a lot of issues or potential issues that not only you as a follower, or you as middle manager, or you especially as a leader, if you want to function in this global economy, in this global market, they're going to kind of work through some of these as we talk about them, and as we go through this chapter. And whether you're an expat and you go over there to live and you become immersed in that country's culture, or you're one of these global domestic with 1 foot here in the United States and 1 foot overseas, both roles need to interact with individuals of different geographically backgrounds or cultures. I mean, that's just a given. I can tell you that I've been overseas enough that if you don't speak the language, or you don't even try to speak the language, it is somewhat difficult to get along overseas. Some cultures, depending on where you end up, try to help you out once they find out you're American and may not have a great command of the language, but there are other cultures just shut you down. They are just not going to help you. I've had a lot of difficulty in France, especially once you get out in the hinterlands, because a lot of those individuals speak French and they don't even understand English and couldn't help you if they wanted to. And one thing that the authors push, and I think it is a very valid concept, is understanding the American culture and business context is a driver To understand and deal with other cultures or business contexts as a leader, one must first understand his or her own context, ways of doing business, and solving problems. If you can't understand, the contextual issues, remember, effective leadership is leader, follower, and context. And if you have trouble with with the context here in the United States, or even understanding the basics of our culture here in the United States, it's going to be, I don't want to say impossible, but it's going to be extremely difficult for you to function as a leader if you go overseas. And one of the things, and the authors go through, and we're going to go through 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 of them, and they compare what they think we see here in the United States and what it is if you go overseas. So the first one is cultural looseness, strong social norms, sanctioning wrong behavior. I mean, that's basically here in the United States, cultural tightness versus cultural looseness. So, we're considered kind of a loosey-goosey society, I guess, in other cultures. But if you compare the culture and the context here in the United States, we say, especially in the Orient is appears to be cultural stiffness, and there are certain ways of doing business, and I think maybe Saudi Arabia is the same way. There's just things that are etched in stone in some of these overseas cultures that people I've again been overseas enough that I see some of these cultural issues, and I think, I'm just glad I don't live here. I'm glad I do live in the United States. Geographically, and there are these subcultures. So these geographically based subcultures. So even though that you think you have a great understanding of the business world and the culture, and I'll keep picking on France, but in France, once you get out into the hinterlands, there's some subcultures that it's just not the same. And I hear people talk about, in the French language, there's Parisian French, and then there's French, and it's almost like Parisian French, and French, and if you go to Montreal, there's French Canadian, and there's just a lot of dialects in the French language. So even though you may head out the door and think you're going to survive in France because you can speak French, it depends on where you end up in France and which subculture you're in, as to how successful you're going to be, at least with your language issues. Secondly, people can change or better themselves under the right conditions, and that's American ingenuity. In the U.S., we're considered in most cultures the country of opportunity. Socioeconomic class at birth is fixed for life in a lot of cultures. You're born to royalty. I mean, look at Prince William, born to royalty, and you have others in England that, it's not hardly as backward as it has been in the past, but it's still there are social and economic classes in a lot of these cultures, and it's just not the same way. And if you're used to the way of life here in the United States, you need to grasp some of these differences before you decide to go overseas and may take a leadership position with a global company. In the United States, cultural norms and values encourage people to better themselves. It's you're enrolled at Fisk to better yourself. Some of you in this leadership class are undergraduates. Some of you are coming back. Maybe I don't want to call it continuing education, coming back to pursue a master's degree. But again, it doesn't matter which group you're in this class. You are in this class to better yourself and hopefully to position yourself, to develop a toolbox that's going to help you position yourself to not only financially improve maybe your situation or your family situation, but to improve your ability to climb that corporate ladder and to reach the goals that you're interested in. If you talk about, they talk about the third one is individualism. And U.S. is considered a country of rugged individualism, reward individual efforts. And I think it was Herbert Hoover in like 1928 or somewhere thereabouts in a speech. That was the first time they talked about rugged individualism, and he threw that out in that speech. And the United States is thought of as a country of rugged individuals. Collectivism is more the Pacific Rim, especially Japan. U.S., with issues of war, terrorist attacks, COVID. I mean, the way we deal with some of these things is completely different than the way that other cultures would deal with them. And then you have dualism, when seemingly disparate aspects of a culture occur simultaneously, for example, individualism and collectivism. And that can happen in some countries. And you have to, as a global leader, understand if they are happening simultaneously, which way that you as a global leader need to react to certain situation. You act as, an individual, or you'll act as, the collectivism that, may exist in those cultures. And it could be make or break for your business decisions. Paradox, the leaders need to embrace and try to harmonize seemingly disparate phenomena. And you're going to have really weird things happen to you in France or Germany or Japan or Taiwan, South America, India. It doesn't matter where you go. You're going to have to juggle as a leader and make decisions, especially business decisions, with all of these conflicting concepts depending on which country you're trying to function in. And then number 4, they talk about universalism. Believe that certain principles or values hold true across all contexts. That may be the way we approach it here in the United States, that, one size fits all. That, and you'll have individuals that go to a foreign country and end up in that, what they call it, that, round square peg in a round hole. And they end up with, they talk about particularists who believe it all depends on context and need to tell a lie or omit some aspect of the truth for family or friend, then so be it. And that's some of the other cultures. And so that's where individuals in the United States may struggle, even though there seems to be a rise of kind of dualism, so that you can, kind of have, again, one foot in each of these particular contexts. And so if you are capable of doing that, maybe you're going to have a more successful opportunity if you go and work in the business world globally. And then, number 5 is doing is better than being. In the United States, it's, work to live, or is it live to work? And I think we're all kind of caught in that paradox. And a lot of us, especially that have been in the business world, or maybe want to go into the business world, you're going to deal with that all the time. It's especially once you get into leadership, at least my experience has always been, once you get into leadership, you can forget a 40-hour work week. You're talking about sometimes 60, 70, 80 hours a week to work, talking about working weekends. And that's just the expectation. And with a lot of companies, that is the expectation. And some individuals have trouble dealing with that. I think in the French culture, the work week is, I want to say 35 and a half hours. And, other cultures are similar. In Spain, they, pretty much pull the plug on things from about, noon to 2 or 3 o'clock. United Auto Workers, I think they were negotiating, and I don't know whether they, decided to accept the contract or not, but they were negotiating for a, 4-day work week. So the United States may be moving, more to that than maybe some of your, global situations that you run into. But, at some point, work is either your identity or your calling. And if you're kind of in that doing mindset, performance oriented, and work defines a person. Career goals are greater than your personal goals. And if you think about the being aspect of it, there's more value on non-work activities. And I think you see that a lot in a lot of your global economies. In I guess a few years ago, was in France over Christmas, and at at noon on Christmas Eve, I mean the place just shuts down. There was nothing going on from noon on Christmas Eve until the 26th. I mean, businesses closed, restaurants were shut down. It was a strange feeling because you've got the hustle and bustle here in the United States. You've got shoppers still out there scrambling around on Christmas Eve until late afternoon, early evening, trying to get that last set of presents purchased and to get them home. And on Christmas Day, you've got grocery stores open and restaurants open, and I don't know. It's just a different mindset in some of these global economies, and it's one of those things that in all of these 7 or 8 issues that we're talking about here, or concepts, or situations and context. You just need to think through them, and not only ask yourself, could you function in a situation like that, but how is your family going to function in a situation like that? If you've got kids that are still in school, especially up through high school, how are they going to function in an environment like that? Let's say you've got high school age young men, and they love playing football. There's not a lot of football teams once you get outside the United States, or true football teams. I guess they consider soccer football once you get outside the United States. But if you're thinking about tackle football, there's not a lot of opportunities. Like some countries you could play rugby, but there's you just those are things that impact not only you as a leader, but impacts your family, as depending on what decision you make. Time. The next one is time should be revered and carefully managed. In the United States, it's time is money. We revere and value time because we are, for the most part, or at least we used to be, a doing society. 15 minutes late, who cares? My son has a friend that's from Italy, and when they were in graduate school together in France, it was like, Mark, even the professors laughed about it. A lot of the classes were 2 and 3 hour classes, and talking about their PhD program, you would think individuals were responsible and professional enough to show up on time, but not this dude. This dude, sometimes he'd be an hour late. Sometimes he wouldn't show up at all. But he had that Italian mindset. Hey, I'm not on time. Who cares? And individuals that are used to leading in the United States, you get into a situation that in Italy, and your team doesn't show up, or they come dragging in late, or they're still hung over from the night before. I mean, it is a trying situation for you as a leader. This is one I like. It's the past is gone, and only the present and future are really important. And that's the way. I think that's the way that we view things here in the United States. Probably going to date myself a little, but Fleetwood Mac had that song, that was one of their hits, "Don't Stop," and it was something about don't stop thinking about tomorrow. Yesterday's gone. I mean, that was part of the lyrics of their song, and that was kind of the situation here in the United States, and to some extent still is the mindset here in the United States. We dwell on the future and don't value history as much as maybe we should. Dwell on current and future possibilities. If you flip that and you're talking about especially some of the Western European or some of the Pacific Rim cultures, they understand history to keep from making the same mistakes, and it's the historical significance of activities or opportunities weighs significantly in the way that they go about a decision-making process. Openness and directness is, kind of number 8 on their list of things to think about that they went through in the text. And we are, open rather than private or aloof. We're direct and to the point. Some cultural behavior may seem obvious. I mean, we just assume, if you're in a business meeting, and you should be open and direct, and you're negotiating, especially if you're negotiating contract. You're, two individuals sitting across the negotiating table in the United States. They know that they are negotiating, and they are charged with the fiduciary responsibility for their respective organizations. And they're not so much concerned with negotiating a situation that everybody's a winner. They're thinking about negotiating a situation in which you got a winner and a loser. And if you flip that to, say, Pacific Rim, or especially Japan, they talk about rephrasing questions, and they talk about body language, and they a lot of business decisions are made, in the sauna, or made at dinner, or made at more socially acceptable events than maybe we think about here in the United States. And again, the authors talk about there's differences within subcultures, and Americans have little understanding of other cultures and feel that our culture is superior. And I think that is the perception, at least, of the global environment, that Americans are a little aloof. We're a little caught up with ourselves. We're a little more self-important than other cultures are, and they provide an example in the book, and I think I can't remember how they phrased it, but I can provide a somewhat example, and again, I'm going to pick on the French again, and so you go to you here in the United States. Let's say we're going out to dinner. We're hustle, hurry. We go out to dinner. We get a reservation. We go in. You don't hardly get your seat till the waitress over. She slaps that menu on the table. She says, "Hi, I'm Mary Lou. I'm going to be your server tonight. Can I get you something to drink?" She'll maybe do some drink orders, and comes back and sets the drinks down on the table and said, "Can I take your order?" You're all maybe haven't even looked at the menu, and so you're scrambling around trying to get your order in, and your order's given to her. She brings your food, and you may not even be done eating before she's back and saying, "Can I, you're interested in any coffee, interested in a, after dinner drink? Would you like some dessert?" And if you say no, man, she puts a check on the table, and that's your cue to hurry up and choke it down and hit the road. And if you've ever been to France, it is just, and I really enjoy the aspect of dining in France from the perspective of, it's not a hurry. They're not going to rush you, and don't expect them to get in a hurry. If you're in a hurry and you're in a restaurant in France, you can forget it. You're better off just not going into the restaurant to get something to eat. You're better off going into a Monoprix and or one of the little grocery stores and grabbing you something to, like a ham and cheese sandwich, something to drink, and be on your way. But you go into a restaurant in France, you sit down, they seat you. There may be some bread and butter on the table, or some other things on the table that you can kind of munch on while you're waiting. Most times I don't want to say automatically bring you a carafe of wine, but that's kind of the expectation. And you order carafe of wine, and you're sitting there, and it's a social function. You're having dinner, you're talking about what you did during the day, and having a drink. And then after a while, the waiter or waitress will come by, and she'll say, any questions I can answer, and that's just the way. And you will order, and next thing you know, you spent, 3 or 4 or 5 hours having dinner, and that's just the way it's done in France. And that's one of the things I like about the French culture is it just gives you the opportunity to just enjoy a meal, and it's certainly different than here in the United States. And if you end up as a leader in one of these globally focused firms, and you take a client, a business partner, somebody out to dinner, before you go out to dinner, you need to make sure you understand that here are the parameters that you go through when you go out to dinner. Alcohol considered a no-no, or is it just socially accepted? How much time, should you spend? Do you tip? Do you? I mean, there's just a lot of things that you'll have to get your arms around, at least that first time out the door. After a while, it gets to be second nature, but it is definitely a different environment. And we're going to stop right there, and we'll come back, and we may be able to finish this chapter up in one more segment, but talk to you in a few minutes.